We're here with the Warrens today doing their pool school on their new pool that we just finished up here in Nolensville. We're going to be going over a couple of things here in the pool to explain what the items in the pool do. We'll start off over here in the deep end of the pool. You have two main drains down in the bottom of the pool. There's two there for safety reasons. That way if anyone gets into the pool and they get down low in the pool and on the bottom of the pool, there's no capture effect, so there's no grab, so it's a safety thing. So there's two there, so if you were to step on one and completely cover that up, it basically diverts the water through the other drain, so there's no risk of any drowning or harm or anything like that. There isn't much maintenance involved with these drains. One of the main things that may have to happen come fall would be if you have a lot of leaves that enter the pool and they get stuck on top of it. You'd either put your pool cleaner over here in the pool or take one of your pole and your brush and basically just knock the stuff off of those drains. Other than that, they're there, they stay there, and they're more or less left alone. So the drains are basically just sucking water from the pool and taking it over to your filter equipment to get treated with the filter, the UV, and heated and chlorinated as well. The other suction item on your pool is your skimmer box over here in the shallow end. So this will be one of your primary chores, say come fall, anytime there's any debris in the pool, whether it be leaves, floats, toys, anything like that. So all you'll basically do is, has a handle on it, you pull the basket out, take it somewhere where you don't want the mess, whether it's over the fence in a garbage can, and throw it wherever you want it to go. Just drop it back in. One thing to be mindful of inside here is it's hard to see right here, there's a little door. So if you do have like floats and stuff like that, you don't want to allow that door to get stuck up. If it does, it could imitate the water level being too low, and you'd start to hear like a gurgling air weird noise from here where it would indicate either my water level's low and the pool equipment may not be operating the way it should be, or that something's stuck and it's just holding that door up. So as you check the basket and empty the basket, you basically just check that. If you're ever gonna have any little ones running around the pool and say you're walking away to your garage or your dumpster, make sure when you walk away to put this lid back on, because if children are running around the pool deck, you don't want to leave this hole open for them to trip on.
Right.
This whole purpose of your skimmer is basically to remove any dirt and debris off the top of the water. So it's also your good reference point as far as where your water level should be kept. So if you look at the front of the skimmer, right now it's about halfway up. If you wanted to add another ½ inch to an inch of water, you could, but you don't ever want to allow the water to get up above that opening, because then it's not going to hurt anything. The skimmer's just not going to function the way that it's supposed to.
Okay.
The other thing for us to talk about are the return jets. So you have one jet over there near the deep end, near your tanning ledge. The other one is over here next to your ladder. So it's down here, just maybe 10 or so inches down. If we point the deep end return jet down, that way it keeps good circulation through the bottom of the pool. And you see how that one's turned up to keep the water moving. You really shouldn't ever have to mess with them. If you want to move them, they're basically just righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. If you want to remove them, like they get removed when you do the winterization and the plug gets put in. But if you're in the pool and playing around with them, you can turn them any which way you want.
Okay.
Now, while we're over here, we'll talk about your pool alarm. There's currently not a battery in this, but basically, as of 2012, this became a code, a regulation where we have to sell them and have to put them on every pool in Tennessee. I'm gonna pull it off just to show you how this works. So you have a on button, which is basically like arming the alarm. You have a test, which is basically a battery check. So if you press this and it chirps, it means the batteries are good. Reset is for when the alarm's going off. If, say it was a false alarm, you press the reset button and it just rearms it. Most importantly, if it's going off and you just want to turn it off and disarm the alarm completely, you'd press the on and reset together and hold it down until it beeps at you. One thing to be mindful with these is if you're going to have them on and actually use them, be mindful of the weather and the cleaner. So if this is armed and on and you put the pool cleaner in the pool, it's going to disturb enough of the water to trigger the alarm to set it off.
I was going to ask what makes the alarm go off.
So in the bottom, there's a little flapper.
Okay.
So it's basically, I believe it's anything 5 pounds or heavier enters the water, it creates enough of a ripple to hit that flapper, triggering the alarm.
Okay.
The one downside to these things, as far as just you being at your house, is when the alarm goes off, it does not turn itself off till you come out here and turn it off.
Okay.
So the things to be mindful of is, you know, you have a fence, you're secure in your backyard, that's great, that's what every pool owner should do. But if you have it armed and say 2 a.m. rolls around, you get a big thunderstorm, it could go off and it's almost as loud as a car alarm. So it can be a little bit of a nuisance, but it's, you know,
especially for your neighbors. Right?
Exactly, it's code, it's regulation, we don't have a choice, it has to go in the pool, so it is what it is. But
where does the battery?
We'll get one put in. It just has 4 screws on the back and it takes a 9-volt battery.
Oh, okay.
Other things on the pool, I think we've already addressed. There was a small wrinkle on the stair that we got taken care of. Everywhere else we looked, it seems to be fine. If you do find something later on when you're getting in the pool, all you got to do is let us know and we can come out and take care of it.
Okay.
Let's see.
How durable is the liner? So like we have 2 dogs, so if they jump in.
So the one thing you want to do with big, small, medium dogs.
They're big dogs.
Okay, so what you want to do is not allow them to get into the water until you're willing to get into the water with them. Because the biggest thing for a dog in a vinyl liner pool is if they're not comfortable and they freak out and they're starting to scrape the walls of the pool, that will cause a hole. But as far as them physically just walking on the steps to get in and out, that's fine. You just want to train them to say, you know, basically show them this is your way in, this is your way out.
Okay.
And if one of them kind of has a problem with it, then you may want to kind of try and keep them away from the pool.
Okay.
But the stairs, they have a textured tread on them, so they're actually a little thicker and a little bit more durable than the rest of the pool liner.
All right.
So as far as what we talked about over here, the function of the skimmer, that makes sense to you?
Yes.
And the main drains, that makes sense to you?
Yes.
And the return jets in the pool, makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. Here we are at their pool equipment. We're going to go over the operation of the filter, the pump, the UV, and the heater, and the chlorinator, kind of doing a walkthrough of what their responsibilities are as a pool owner, what items they need to take care of weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. We're going to start off down here. These gray handles, you have 4 total. These are called ball valves. So all these valves are doing is turning on or off the flow of water from what they're dedicated to. So these top 2 large ones that run into the front of your pump, this is called the suction side of the cleaner. This one we've labeled for the main drains. Those are your 2 drains down in the bottom of the pool. This one is for your skimmer, which is the skimmer in the shallow end. So all these are doing is basically pulling water. Now, basic pool operation, let's say like 90% of the time, these valves will all be left open. This one down here is your return jets. So those are going to those 2 jets that we were looking at in the pool. This one is to your waterfall, which we had already kind of discussed a little earlier, that one will operate more or less when you want to run the waterfall, you'll turn it on, but it's not really a design or function for it to just stay on all day, day in and day out. So one of your chores that'll happen about every 3 weeks, just depending on how much debris gets in the pool, is this is your pump. This is what's moving the water. Periodically, about every 3 weeks, you'll have to pull this pump lid off and empty the basket. So you have your basket in the skimmer, which is like your first line of defense, and this basket in the pump is like your last line of defense, because you don't want any twigs and leaves or any physical debris to go into here, because it's very similar to like a propeller on a boat. You don't want it to chop stuff up, you want to keep it clean. So the process of cleaning this, your first and most important thing is to turn the pump off. You're never going to open or really do anything over here with this guy running. You always turn it off first. So if you go behind me, you have your breaker panel. Everything's labeled, so your top left one is your pump. So you're just going to turn that off. Now you can probably hear me better too. So before we open this lid up, we're going to close the valves. The reason we want to close these valves before we open the pump lid is that all the water that's in these lines, by closing them, we're keeping them there. So if we were to open this lid up with these lines open, the air is going to go back into the pipes and it's going to make it more difficult for this to restart back up. So just remember, pump off, valves closed. Once you're done cleaning the basket, the next thing to always remember is it's important. One of the more important things really with this whole lesson is you never want to turn this pump back on with the valves closed. So it's kind of like pump off, valves closed, clean the basket, put the lid back on, then you're going to open your lines back up and then turn the pump on. So the lid's just threaded, and then of course it's going to be on there really well. So it's just a two-piece lid. Ooh. And this is not as much fun doing this in the winter or when the water is really cold also. So there's not a whole lot in here. There's a couple twigs, a little bit of some mortar. Just put that here for now. And if you want to be really particular, you can get a garden hose, spray it out on the outside, remove all the debris that way, but most of the time just shaking it and hitting it on the pad is what's going to work good enough. When you go to put it back in, there's a large hole in the front of the basket. Make sure that faces the center pipe. And don't feel like you have to remember every single word I'm saying, because I have a little booklet that kind of goes over a lot of this. And just because your pool's more or less mostly done now doesn't mean we're like going away and you're never going to see us again. So put the lid back on, it's secure. I'm going to open up the skimmer, the drain, and the return jets. Because you have a waterfall, we're just going to still leave that closed at this point. Walk back over here. And when you turn it back on, you want to make sure you don't walk away until you see this running and fully primed back up. There shouldn't be a big, massive amount of air bubbles in there. You should be able to see the water moving. And another point of reference is you can take a look back to the pool and you see, hey, I got the jets moving, I can see the water moving, I know my pump's running like it's supposed to. The only other thing that you'll really ever do with the pump is if you guys decide that you will want to winterize the pool at times, whether or not you pay us to do it or you do it yourselves, everything out here has plugs. So you'll have winterization plugs that you'll want to drain the water out of your filter, your pump, and your heater. That way all of this equipment that's sitting above ground doesn't have any chance to freeze and break. Freeze damage is not something you'll enjoy or we enjoy either. It's just not fun. So after the water runs through the basket, it comes up this pipe and runs into your sand filter. This piece on top is called the multi-port. All this is doing is directing the flow of water. So basically right now with this little notch facing filter, that means we're telling the filter to filter the water the way it's supposed to, and you just have water running through this tank, through the sand holds the dirt, and the clean water goes through. And it's doing that obviously at a very, very rapid rate. There's a few other positions on this valve that you may use eventually. There's a waste. So if, say your water level gets too high from like all the rain we've been having, you would turn the pump off, turn this handle to waste, turn the pump back on, and water is going to drain out of the pool. You wouldn't want to walk away. It's going to do this pretty quick. So in like 5 to 10 minutes, you're likely going to drop 1 inch to 2 inches of water level. So it's not something that you're going to put it on waste, turn it on, go in and make a cup of coffee or something like that and forget about it. You're going to come out and your water level is going to be substantially lower. The main other thing, or one of your main chores with this that you'll be required to do is what's called backwashing the filter. So as the water runs through the sand in the filter, it collects all the dirt. Eventually there gets to be too much dirt. So by backwashing, it just runs the water reverse and we shoots the dirty water out of this pipe right here onto the ground. And depending on how dirty the pool gets, that's really a weekly to bi-weekly chore. The more you use it and the more contaminants that are introduced to the pool, the more frequently you'll have to backwash it. Now there is a pressure gauge here. My personal preference is to make it a habit thing. So if you guys are, working Monday through Friday and you're kind of weekend warriors on the weekend, I tell most of my customers, if you can give your pool 30 to 45 minutes worth of attention on a Sunday and do this every Sunday, the pressure and the dirt in here is never going to build up large enough to create a problem. So it's kind of like changing your oil in your car. You do it every 3,000 miles because if you go over, it could be damaging the car. Similar concept of backwashing it. I'm going to wait till the end to do it just because it's going to put some water down here. The last position over here is recirculate. You won't use that very often. All that is doing is just moving the water through the pool, and the water is bypassing this tank. If you ever have problems with like green pools and algae, there's certain chemical treatments that require you to put it on recirculate, but it's not really common enough for us to waste a whole lot of time on it. Last thing in this filter, it holds, this one I think is a 400-pound filter. The sand in this filter will last for at least 5 years. The better you take care of the water, the longer it'll last. My dad's pool, I think he changes his sand every 10 years. So, I mean, it can last at varying different lengths of time. The better you take care of it, the longer it lasts. For winterization, like I was talking about, drain plugs, down there at the bottom, that's your water drain plug. If you were to winterize, that's what removes the water from this. So once the water is filtered out of here, it comes out here. It's running down, this may be difficult to see, over this blue Astral UV unit is basically helping break down bacteria and sanitize the pool water. Now, depending on what's in your water, it may not fully kill it in one pass, but it's gonna break it down enough to where when you go to treat your water, you're not having a large amount of chlorine in your pool to sanitize it. You're keeping it at maybe, which this will make sense when we explain it, but about 1 to 1.5 parts per million of chlorine. So it's a lot lower level than what you're gonna find at like the YMCA or a commercial pool. There are a couple exceptions. You know, if you're having a 4th of July pool party and there's 30 people over here, you're probably gonna want a little bit more chlorine in the pool just because there's more people in the pool. But it's pretty much standalone. The only maintenance with this unit is about every season to season and a half, the bulb will need to be replaced. They're not very, very expensive depending on the unit. I think yours is probably around $175 to replace it. I'll tell people if you're gonna have us close or open your pool and you know it's time to change, then you can go ahead and request it at that time. The way you'll know if it's running is these little white ends where the connections are. It's difficult to see during the day, but they'll glow a dark blue in the evening. So if you're by here and for whatever reason you kind of see that, hey, it's not lit up, I need to call them and see if, you know, if it's happened too soon or perhaps it just needs to be replaced. But the beautiful thing about that is you're not ever really having to touch that. Your main thing you'll be touching over here is this guy. So the water from the UV unit runs back here and runs into your pool heater. Now, I know the gas isn't completely finished with your pool heater, but the easiest way to think about the heater is like the thermostat in your house. Now, obviously this isn't gonna cool your pool, but that's not what it's for, to where you want your pool at 85 degrees, you press the on button, you turn the temperature up to 85 degrees, make sure it cuts on and walk away. Now, depending on the time of the year, you may not wanna do that in December, because it could take a lot of gas, which is gonna cost you a lot of money to get it that warm. But for having this, you're gonna be able to extend your season at least 30 days on the front and 30 days on the back. And if you're crazy enough and it's December 25th and you say, I don't care what it costs, I wanna heat my pool, you have the option to do that, because with gas, it will heat your pool extremely quick. I mean, your size pool is about 16,000 gallons, so probably 6 to 8 hours to get it up to 85, 88 degrees, something like that. So it's not a ridiculous amount of time. Same thing on the heater as far as the winterization goes. If you decide to winterize the pool, there's drain plugs and things on the heater. The reason I keep bringing that up is, you know, everything you've purchased from us has a warranty, labor, product, all that. One of the few exceptions to that, especially with what's sitting on this pool equipment pad, is freeze damage. We don't want it as much as you don't want it, but in our book, you know, it's kind of considered neglect. You let it freeze. So like we talked about the waterfall, as long as you catch it ahead of time and have a plan, and you guys seem like you're well organized enough that you're not gonna happen. The only other thing back here, which I may want you to step back and take a look here, if you want to come here for a second. You see these little these two handles?
Yeah. Yes.
That's what's called a bypass. So let's say you decide to run your pool during the winter, but you don't want the water running through your heater, less chemical exposure to the heater, less degrading of the heater. we can create a shortcut with those handles to where we allow the water to keep circulating. Let's say then we just winterize the heater and this is now safe for the winter, but the pool is continued and able to move and circulate the water. That's just kind of a little add-on to where if you want to circulate the pool, but you know, just like anything else, the more you run it and the water's running through it, the lifespan of it is just slowly decreasing.
Right.
The last thing is the water runs out of the heater. This is your chlorinator. So this is where your tablets are gonna physically go. So it's not like an old pool where you're putting your tablets in the basket and trying to have it chlorinate that way. It's much more difficult to regulate. The unit we use is clear, so that say, you know, months from now when you're maintaining this on your own, you can just walk out here, look at the side of this unit, see if there's tablets in there, and at the same time you'll drop a test strip in the pool, you'll test the pool, hey, the chlorine's low. Oh, that makes sense because there's no chlorine in here, I need to add some. Now the other cool thing with this guy is on this back side, there's a dial and it goes from 0 to 5. So as you become your own pool owner and you're testing the water yourself, we'll probably start off with it because the water's cold at like a 1, maybe a 2 tops. But as the summer gets closer and it's going to be getting warmer, expect for that dial to need to go up because the warmer water needs more chlorine for it to treat. Now we're still not going to be keeping those levels anywhere near what a commercial pool is. We're still keeping them low because of the UV, but when those temperatures transition, you'll need to have that kind of mental reminder to say, hey, we'll need to check this and adjust it. Now, when it comes time to add tablets to this, it's a very similar process as it is to emptying this basket. So step 1 is turn off your pump. Still want to close the valves. That's me kind of being a little picky. Some people don't do that, but I like to just make that a habit and a routine. That way you always get used to it. Now, when you go to remove this lid, a thing to be considerate about, if this has had chlorine in it for an extended period of time and say there's a little air bubble up here, you don't want to be directly over it because that gas and that chlorine vapor could come up and hit you in the face. So you just kind of want to be off to the side and then there we go. So you pull the lid off, set it down. Now, when we have tablets, you're basically just going to take them, drop them in, and we have some here that we'll do in a minute. If you see that the water's overflowing like this and you're worried about the chlorine splashing back on you, you can open this valve for the return jets, and it's just going to slowly drain that water back to the pool. That way you're not worrying about that tablet dropping in there and having water come back, whether it's getting on you, bleaching your clothes, any of that type of stuff, so you can just avoid it. So when you hear the little gurgle, you just close it, and then I'm gonna walk right over here, grab the tablet so I can show you. So this is about a 5-pound bucket of chlorine tablets. During different times of the years, this size bucket may last you different amounts of time. Sometimes people will buy big buckets, small buckets, whatever you want. You can load this up all the way. I typically recommend about half full. That way it's just not getting too saturated. The tablets we sell are packaged. If you are slightly OCD and it drives you crazy, they don't stack perfectly, don't put your hand in here and try and straighten them out. Just kind of deal with it, because I've had a lot of people say that before. We're like, well, they're not stacked straight. That's driving me nuts. And it's just, you don't want to handle these any more than you have to. So we'll put one more in. Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention on the pump lid, there's an O-ring there, and there's also an O-ring on your chlorinator cap. So before I leave, I have a little tube of lubricant that basically, this one especially because it's exposed to chlorine, you can get a little dab of that on your hand and just wipe it around. That way that O-ring will last 5 times longer versus you having to replace one every couple of years. It just basically makes it last longer. So put the lid back on. Before we turn the pump on, we're going to open the valves all back up. Walk back here to the breaker, flip the pump breaker on. The last thing to talk about on this is sometimes it may not fill up all the way. This is the part that you want to be very careful on, is if you have it half full of water and say there's tablets that are not under the water, very carefully, you crack the lid, bleed the air out, because you want this to be full of water at all times, and then just tighten it back down. Anytime you kind of mess with this basket or possibly doing a backwash cycle, you may have to do that. But like I said, it sounds like a lot of work what we're discussing, but if you get in the habit of doing this and give your pool 30 to 45 minutes worth of time a week, you'll love owning a pool. If you know, there's some people that go, well, I spent a lot of money. You know, pools can be expensive, but just like having a nice car, it has maintenance involved with it. You give it that small amount of time, you'll enjoy owning a pool. If you kind of forget about all this stuff, it could potentially become a headache because you're not taking care of it. Is there anything in here that does, and we're gonna do a backwash off camera in a minute, is there anything in here you want me to go over again? Doesn't make sense? So now we're gonna be going over the water chemistry and testing the pool. Now, easiest way, you know, this will be one of your bigger hurdles as far as having a pool and taking care of it, just because it can be a lot to take in. You know, there's different chemical things. The test strips that we bought you today test for the 3 absolute key components that you can't skip or skimp on at all. The 3 things you absolutely have to balance. Later in owning a pool, there'll still be some other things that you'll want to balance and add that you will need to. One of the things that we recommend is our Cool Spring store. As a part of learning this, if you are ever in that area, you can take a water sample into the store, get it tested. They'll do a digital printout of a walkthrough of ounce by ounce or pound by pound what you need to put in your pool. Another benefit to that is if you have a spa as well, you could take both samples in as well. Now for a hot tub, if it gets too terribly out of whack, a lot of the times you can just remove the water from it and refill it, whereas with this large amount of water, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So one of the things over there that we were talking about was chlorine, which is one of the more important things because that's what's sanitizing the water as well as with the UV to make sure it's clean and safe. With this being a new pool, it's likely to have a low to 0 level. So all you're going to do is take your strip, dip it in the pool just for a few seconds. You're going to take it out, compare it to the back of the bottle, and we're basically matching colors. So your top one is your free chlorine. So it's obviously it's a nice solid white, which is a 0. Now, one of the things that if you're testing this in the future that you'll want to do is if you test it and you see a 0, you're going to want to walk right back over to your chlorinator where we just put those tablets in. And if there's tablets in there, either adjust the dial up, or if there's 0 tablets, add a few more, adjust the dial accordingly. Now with it being cold like it is now and the water temperature's low, having 0 chlorine in it isn't as big of a deal, especially because algae and things like that are going to grow in warmer water and when we have more sunlight out basically. If you had a situation to where you tested the water, 0 chlorine, let's say it is in season, it's summer and it's warm, you would still check your chlorinator the way that we did, but another one of the corrective actions would be if you say you felt that some slime on the pool and you started to notice, hey, maybe some algae is starting to grow, that's where you would get a granular shock. You dose it out, which we've brought you today. You dose it out, broadcast it in the pool, which we're gonna do here before we leave just to get the levels up. If you shock your pool with the chlorine shock, especially the stuff that we sell, you cannot enter the water for about 8 to 10 hours. So often it's very good to do it in the evening. Another good reason to do it in the evening is then you're not going to have the UV from the sun trying to pull all that chlorine out of the water. Also coincides with most people aren't, you know, if you're going to bed 9, 10 o'clock, you shock it, perfect for the next morning, say it's a Friday night or something like that, then you're good to go in and jump in on the weekend. The next thing that's on these test strips is alkalinity. Alkalinity and the pH level do coincide, so they kind of related basically. The first thing, and these are all in order, so basically test, balance, check, and fix your chlorine first, then you're going to move down to the next one of doing your alkalinity. This is what controls your pH level. So say your alkalinity is either very low or very high. If it's very low, your pH level is likely going to still be very low as well. If your alkalinity level is very high, your pH is going to kind of follow suit. So they have this okay bracket on these test strips. So between 80 and 120 on your alkalinity is where you want to keep it. Right now, because it's probably fresh tap water, it looks like we're right on the border of it being low to high. So I'd say, based off these strips, maybe a 50 or 60. When it comes time to dose chemicals, as far as what amount you're going to put in your pool, if there's ever a point that you're, the bottles will basically have amounts. It'll say this amount treats this much water and will raise it this much. Say you do the calculations, you're looking at the back of the container and you're still a little nervous that you may overdo it, just put in half of what you've come up with. So right now, based off, I would say the pool probably needs roughly 5 pounds of alkalinity, but say you're doing it on your own and you're a little nervous and you don't want to mess it up, cut that amount in half, add it, let the pool circulate for a day, recheck it, and if you were wrong, you just saved yourself. If you were right, you can just add that other half of that dose that second day. And I'm not saying do that forever, just as you're starting to learn and take care of a pool. It's basically the safe way of doing it, because it's a lot easier to add additional chemicals to the pool than it is to remove them. Because if you come out here and put double as much alkalinity increaser in here, then your pH is going to kind of climb up like a roller coaster, and you're going to try and basically be trying to fix that with additional chemicals that you'll have to purchase. So less is more in the world of pool chemicals. The bottom one is the alkalinity, which, as it appears, it's the hardest one to kind of tell the color on, but I would say it's probably at a 7, which is on the lower end of the spectrum. You typically want it at a 7.4. Now, with it being low, that doesn't mean that you would need to put in a pH increaser. So if we just said, okay, the alkalinity is a hair low, you'll balance the alkalinity first, let that get adjusted into the water, check everything back later, and 9 times out of 10, that alkalinity is going to raise your pH up where it needs to be as well. On the other end of the spectrum, say the levels get too high and your pH is, above 7.8, that's when you would use an acid. What we sell is called pH decreaser. You would dose the amount the same way you would the increaser. You're at this level, you have this much water, and you're trying to get to here. So you dose it out, put it in the pool. And if all of the balancing of the chemicals on your own is too much for you and you just don't want to deal with it, that's why we have a store that does free water testing. You take a sample in, we test it with the lab, we tell you what to do. And even if you're still not doing as much of this at home, over the period of time, you're still going to learn a lot by going into the store and getting it tested. So these test strips will test for those 3 core items, the chlorine, the alkalinity, and the pH. There are a few other chemicals down the road that you will want to get tested. One of them is stabilizer. It's also known as cyanuric acid. Now with your pool, the tablets that we're chlorinating your pool with have a trace amount of this in them. So a lot of the times, just depending on how much chlorine your pool's using, you may not have to physically add any of this. Sometimes if you have a 0 level at the beginning of your summer, you may want to get that up to the lowest level that it's allowed to be, which is around 20 parts per million. And as these tablets get consumed, that level will slowly creep up, but you do not want to allow this to get high. So this would be something that I would recommend getting checked at the store. There are test strips that can test for all of these things, but for new pool owners, we don't like to bring out a test bottle that has 6 or 7 things on it, and it kind of just goes right over your head, and you're like, what am I getting into? Just cover the first 3 basics. One of the other things that you will likely add once to twice a season is calcium hardness. This is primarily to help protect the liner. So if your water does not have calcium, it's going to try and pull it from the things it's in contact with, but your single largest, biggest item is your liner. So once to twice a season, you add your calcium in. You typically put it in either in the net. It does take a little longer to dissolve, so you'll put it in your deep leaf net, run it through the pool, and it'll dissolve. And it just helps keep the liner elastic and doesn't allow it to get brittle. There are a few other things here about metals and staining, but that's a little too much to get into for this. Do the top 3, at least the chlorine, alkalinity, and pH, kind of make some sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And then once a week is what I tell most people. If you get fairly on top of it and you're good at balancing it, and every time you check it, it's all lining up, you could probably jump to once every 2 to once every 3 weeks. But If you do it once a week, especially with your hot tub, because your hot tub levels are going to go more sporadically because it's a smaller amount of water. Once a week to start. Once you get the hang of it, once every 2 to once every 3 weeks. And if you ever have a problem, whether or not you go out of town and the pool's green, or you can't get this to happen, that's when it's best to either call or take a sample to the store, and they can help you troubleshoot the issue and go through everything with you and give you step-by-step instructions.